Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's Real Training for Free. Nick Cavalancia here, sitting in for Randy Franklin Smith. You've come at a great time for this particular topic. I think in looking at the topic itself around lateral movement, thinking about identity as the kill chain, and then specifically looking at the title here, thinking about AD, cloud, and AI. The reason why it's a really good time is because typically we've talked a lot about lateral movement as an industry, certainly in an on-prem context. I think that's old and tired, and we already know that's happening. We're seeing a lot more of it across cloud, and we're going to discuss why it's a bit easier now. And you've got far more different cloud platforms, a lot of different identity stores in use, entitlements that cross and federated identity, and so on. And then this last part, thinking about AI being utilized as part of lateral movement, is really, I don't say it's necessarily forward thinking, because it is happening today, but we're just at the start of it, which is really good. Why I think it's a great time for you to be here, to be thinking about this idea of trying to stop all the forms of lateral movement. Obviously, if you can stop lateral movement, you're really stopping access to other parts of your environment, regardless of where it is, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud or somewhere in between, as the case would be. And without lateral movement, there is no threat actor success. So good opportunity. I'm glad you're here. I do want to introduce and thank the good folks at Silverfort for sponsoring today's webinar. And I do want to introduce our speaker from Silverfort. That's Roy Ackerman. I hope I said that right, Roy. Roy is the VP of Identity Security Strategy at Silverfort. So Roy, did I say it right, or is it Ackerman?
No, it's Ackerman,
okay,
but that's fine.
Very good. Well,
Yeah,
glad you're here, Roy, nonetheless. I'm glad I got it right. Sorry about that. Glad to have you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, wonderful. So before we get started into today's session, as always, a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's session is, of course, being recorded. Should you have to leave a little early, or maybe you want to share the recording with a colleague and so on, you will be sent a link to it within a day or two of the recording today. Also, if you have questions, feel free to put those into the Q&A box that we have. As always, we try to answer questions contextually while we're doing the presentation, whether it's my portion or Roy's portion towards the end here. And the reason for that is just because you might be asking a really interesting question about how'd you get that, or well, what happens if this happens instead of what you showed, and obviously those kind of things don't really translate to 35-40 minutes later when you finally look at the questions in the Q&A box. So we try to answer as many as we can contextually. If we happen to have moved on topically, and or the question sort of comes in a little later, we'll just wait till the very end when we do have our time for Q&A dedicated, and we'll be happy to answer them then as well. You, of course, have in the handout section your PDF of the slide presentation today in case you want to take any notes, something along those lines. Feel free to do so. So let's go ahead and jump in to today's webinar. I'm going to first kind of start with a couple of high-level topics here to set the stage. Want to talk about identity as the new perimeter. I think that's really important here. It used to think, of course, as the four walls as being the perimeter, having a firewall as being the logical perimeter of an organization. And now it's really identity, because there is no perimeter. And if you can stop identity, if you can stop privileged access, you have effectively stopped a cyber attack. It's just that simple. And we want to discuss a little bit around why lateral movement is actually the real breach. That idea of the breakout be from just an initial access point to whatever it is, whether that's an identity in the cloud or it's access to an endpoint or something. It's that lateral movement is actually the real breach, and where it starts. If you can stop that, you've stopped everything here. We'll talk about commodity controls and how they kind of play a role, and how there's still some gaps. We'll talk about hybrid identity sprawl today as well, and then talk about what you should be measuring to actually think about your exposure and your movement risk when it comes to all the things that we're going to talk about today, which is AD, cloud, non-human identities, agentic AI, all of that. And Roy, if it's okay with you, while I'm doing my presentation, I may throw a question your way. At the same time, if you want to interject something, feel free to interrupt me and say, it's interesting, we're seeing this or that. Whatever you want is absolutely fine. Would that be okay?
Yeah, sounds great. Let's go.
Great, let's do it. So the place I want to start is just thinking about sort of a state of identity attacks and lateral movement. Those of you that have sat down on my presentations know I'm a big believer in looking at statistically relevant data that sort of represents the entire industry, as statistically relevant as we can get it. And I've got a couple of interesting data points here around this idea here. And the first one here comes to us from from the Global Incident Response Report from Unit 42, and you can see here the massive number of incident responses involved identity weakness, one way or the other. That could mean either it's a very weak password, maybe there was no password reset on the account, maybe it's easy social engineering that person and gaining access to the account, whatever it is, but it involved some kind of weakness around identity. And that makes sense. Again, said it before, identity is the core factor within a cyber attack. That's what's enabling lateral movement. That's what's enabling access to resources. It's enabling access to entitlements up in the cloud. All of that, we need identity. So we start there. Another one comes to us from the CrowdStrike Global Threat Report, and that is the average breakout time being just 29 minutes. Now, if you're not sure what the breakout time is, that's the time from initial access to lateral movement. And that 29 minutes is 65% faster than the previous year, so than last year's report. That's material. That means they are more than twice as fast than they were last year from the initial access to lateral movement. And this includes both on-prem and cloud-based environments here. And then the last part here, as we think about the ability to kind of stop identity attacks before they happen, typically that's still the number one method of initial access is phishing. And we do see here that 82% of detections were malware free. This also comes from the CrowdStrike data. And thinking about this, it means it's all social engineering. There may not even be links, or there might be just a link to something that is impersonating a logon to a corporate platform of some kind, like Microsoft 365 or otherwise. But there's no malware, so it's very difficult sometimes to detect the threat when it comes in. And so there sort of needs to be there's this assumption that needs to be had around security and the layers of security. And the assumption is that the previous layer is going to fail to some degree. It's the reason why, if you go back to sort of castle, I don't know what if there's actually a strategy, but thinking about like the old times with castles, and you had the moat, and then you had the walls, and then you had the vats of tar that would pour down in case people had ladders for the walls and got across the moat. And if that didn't work, then you had archers. And if that didn't work, then you had people with swords up at the top of the wall. I mean, all those layers are put in place, assuming that the one before it isn't going to stop everyone. And so if we think about that kind of working backwards a little bit here, we have detections being malware free. Okay, that means there's going to be some percentage of phishing-based attacks that are going to work, as an example. Then if I jump over to the 90%, we know that there's some kind of identity weakness, whether that's someone giving up an account, or it's got a very simple password that could be easily be guessed, or whatever the case is there. Then that part, oops, I think I just stopped my presentation and didn't mean to do that. Pardon me real quick. I hit a key. I'm Italian and I talk with my hands. And so I think my hand hit the escape key or something. So sorry about that. And then you go to the 90% there, and you think about identity weaknesses. And so we presume that people are going to give up things. Security awareness training isn't always working. Maybe detection of spoofed or impersonated logon pages isn't always working. Something gets through. And then the 29 minutes for the breakout time means endpoint protection didn't necessarily work all the time, and people were able to break out from there if we're talking about an on-prem type of attack. So I'll stop here. And Roy, I'm just wondering, obviously, this is just a representative sort of data set of what the landscape looks like. What's your thought? Is it this bad? Is it not as bad? Is it worse? What are you seeing with your prospects and your customers?
Yeah, I think that this is pretty accurate. As a matter of fact, I'm running an incident response practice for Salesforce as well. So we're marching in when, let's say, ransomware attack or some other cyber attacks are starting, and we're seeing exactly the same things. Hackers do not exploit anymore. They're logging in exactly in the ways that you spoke about. Then they're pivoting inside the network fairly quickly. So, with a blink of an eye, you can see that within 30 minutes, 50 minutes, they're already all over the network. And the old models of, okay, we will detect exploitation, we will detect some executables or malwares running in the systems are not working anymore. So yeah, it's exactly what we're seeing.
Perfect, perfect. I love that. I always want to get some real world validation just from what the vendors are saying. Just it's another set of eyes, and I think that's really important here. There's a perspective here that I threw out at the beginning when I was covering what I was going to talk about today, and that is that lateral movement is sort of the real breach, if you will. And I do understand. Like I've got my first sort of this is going to be a little contentious of a statement, but I'll run with it. Initial access isn't the breach. We know that that is a breach. Yes, I know it is. It's a breach, but meaning it's not the breach. It isn't what actually enables someone to go and access your data on your multiple systems and then maybe encrypt it and hold it for ransom, or exfiltrate it and then sell it, or hold it, hold it for ransom, whatever the case is. The real breach isn't the initial access. That's just the entry point. I put here, it's just the door. The real thing here is the idea of the lateral movement. And these numbers here, 50,000 and 5 million, are meant figuratively, meaning if you have very little lateral movement, it could be as little as $0 of an incident, because it was just one endpoint that was impacted, as the case would be. Like, let's again taking the example of something that's on-prem, or a single account that was gained access to by Microsoft 365, and if we stopped it there and detected that there was an improper access to Microsoft 365 before that person could send out an email with malware that would then install ransomware that could call back home to a command and control server and blah blah blah. If we avoid all that, it's very, very low cost as far as the incident response goes. But if lateral movement is enabled, that's where the breach, that's where the numbers start attacking on, and where we start seeing a material amount of money taking to both respond to the incident and then also just sort of deal with it, whether you need to pay a ransom or have to worry about things like public perception of the organization, impact on stock price, blah, 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 all that other thing. So the real idea here is the lateral movement. And then when we think about that, we have things like attackers living off the land. They're leveraging built-in tools, and it becomes very easy for them to laterally move. And keep in mind, with that breakout period, being 29 minutes, it doesn't take them long. They're not taking a lot of time to move. It's all being done in a lot of cases automatically, and we've even seen of late attacks that are being used utilizing AI. There was an Anthropic attack that the folks at Anthropic actually detected because it used their Claude engine to make all the decisions, and 90% of the decisions made were completely autonomous. So kind of be thinking about that. But attackers live off the land. And then also, as far as traffic goes, the authentications, because they're living off the land, look authentic. They look normal because they're utilizing regular tools. Now, keep in mind, if you have something that's watching the authentication traffic or has something maybe on, let's say, endpoints or the source of the authentication, and has an ability to see, is that a normal IP address that the request is coming from? Is the lateral movement that they're moving from system to system, is that a system they normally access? Just the whole idea around behavior, that adds a layer, but that's something we're going to talk about a little bit here. But just the lateral movement in and of itself and the authentication in and of itself looks, generally speaking, normal, if you will, here. On the initial access here up at the very top, I said it's not just the breach. Quick data point back from the Unit 42 incident report from the previous page: 65% of initial access is identity driven. That means it's phishing, it's stolen credentials, it's brute force attacks. So it's all identity focused here. On the lateral movement side here, this idea of lateral movement is what's really going to make or break the attack, and therefore the cost of it. Quick stat again from the same report: 65% of ransomware attacks. I take that back. This isn't Unit 42. This is from Coveware. They're a ransomware response company. So specific to ransomware, but just as an analogy or an example here, 65% of ransomware attacks have lateral movement in them. And so that actually seems a little low to me. I'm thinking it's higher because you need to laterally move between all the systems that may have data and sensitive information, intellectual property, so on and so forth. And then the last part here on this, the lateral movement being the real breach here, is that intrusions tend to span multiple attack surfaces. And I want you to think about, I've mentioned endpoints, we've talked about identity providers, we've talked about a little bit about cloud applications, SaaS, it's all in the same intrusion. And according to the Unit 42 incident response report, 87% of attacks involved at least 2 attack surfaces. So this is the other reason why thinking about the perimeter, identity being the perimeter, this is it right here. This 87% involving 2 attack surfaces. Look at the types of attack surfaces. The only real perimeter you have is the use of identity. Roy, anything to add here? I mean, I'm kind of covering this at a very high level, but any insight of something that you'd like to provide that adds some color?
I think that it's exactly what we're seeing, right? It all begins with like a small fault or like a weak user out there that I don't know, like exposed their passwords, or that somebody exploited into their machines and then stole their user and then used it like otherwise. But then the idea is that the ability of the attacker to surf across the network, or to actually pivot across different systems of the organizations, and to do this fast, because identity is the new glue. It's kind of like the connective tissue of the organization. Makes identity the true core of every attack. And this is why hackers really loves identity, spends tons of time in building new techniques in order to exploit that, because it just like get there to their, executing on their objectives fairly quickly. And that's poses a challenge, right? Like for defenders, that should be much faster, and cannot just wait for a detection in order to act. It should be something else over there. And I'll speak about this later.
Wonderful. Appreciate you. Now, of course, I wanted to, they're not breaking in, they're logging in. That was my sort of tongue-in-cheek, like, think about it. That's actually what they're doing. This looks like they're logging in. We used to talk a lot about insider threats, but any external threat actor pretty much at some point looks like an insider. So kind of difficult to tell here. But there's obviously a number of commodity controls, and they do help. You've got the traditional types of implementations like identity access management. You have privileged access management, MFA, those kinds of controls. And I'm generalizing here because I'm not going to talk about each one and dive into it, but we think about those solutions and they do actually provide value. They are going to provide some security and both control and coverage around particularly human identity. We do see some non-human identity, machine types identities as well falling into this category. We do have vaulted privileged credentials that are then made available based on access rules off of process and so on. And then they also add authentication friction. And normally when you hear a phrase like that, you'd hear it with a negatively connotated kind of phrasing. I'm seeing it as being a positively connotated statement. The authentication friction of something like, oh, you want to gain access to a privileged account, you have to log into your PAM solution, you have to make a request, it's going to go validate the behavior that you're doing. Oh, that's a normal request from a normal IP address on a normal time of day, on a normal day of week. And all that looks good, hunky-dory, thumbs up, good. Here you can have access to the privileged credential. That authentication friction is good, because it makes it difficult for threat actors to mimic that. We want that. We want it to have a little bit of friction, not where it makes it difficult for users, but we want the friction for the threat actors here. But then there's still these enforcement gaps that are going to exist within an environment here. Think about things like legacy and on-prem systems that don't work with cloud-first types of, let's say, modern MFA. Okay, cloud applications automatically work with cloud-based MFA. On-prem systems, you might say, well, my Microsoft environment does. Yeah, okay. Active Directory might, but not that accounting package that you got from some accounting company that doesn't give a rip about MFA. They just care about an ID and a password to log into their platform. Very different. Then there's like service accounts and the standing privilege that comes with them. There's no attestation, and the attestation is something that a lot of organizations don't do. Thinking about the tongue-in-cheek, and say the bazillions of groups that now you have across all the platforms, and bazillions might actually be an accurate number for some of you. Obviously still meant figuratively, and attestation of groups, the privileges that they're granted, the entitlements that they're granted access to. If that's not happening, then you just have sort of group entropy that's existing. It's just going to continue to get worse and worse. The analogy there is take a deck of cards, throw it in the air, let it fall on the ground. It's a big mess. Pick it up just like that, throw it up in the air again. It does not stack itself back up. It gets even more messy. And that's what we're ending with. Then you have runtime authentication issues around specific protocols that aren't visible specifically to IAM. So identity access management isn't an understanding runtime authentication as well, so it can't manage that. And then things like AI agents, which we're going to talk about, and even automation. That'll be a topic on another slide here. But there's no governance framework that exists because that is still Wild West. Yes, AI has been around for a while. Agents, we've been talking about agentic AI now for at least a year and a half, I think. But there's still not like standardized control. I know NIST has something out right now about AI governance, but it's not something where you hear it widely being adopted yet. I'm hoping that you all are listening are actually still utilizing something along those lines. And if not, take a look for that. I'll see if I can find a link if somebody wants to ask, and I'll push it out to everybody here. And the thing to think about here is that the coverage that we get with the commodity solutions, like the ones I've named up at the very top, identity access management, PAM, MFA, and others that are helping control, uncover identity, that doesn't necessarily provide control across the board. The sub bullets I've got up above my last entry here sort of makes the case for some examples here where we have coverage with these solutions, but we don't have absolute control over the use of identity and the privilege that comes therein. Roy, what are you seeing, let's say, with prospective customers around the types of controls they typically have in place, and yet still aren't getting the control they need, and maybe a high level why? I know that's a lot of questions in one, but could you cover that?
It's all good. Yes, like I can see vaults, I can see passwords, tokens, certificates. As a matter of fact, when it comes to machine identities, there's more than 60 different types of them. So you're actually utilizing a lot of different features from a lot of different vendors. So for a lot of people, like they have at least the software or those features. The problem is in the implementation. So even if you're putting a control in place, configuring it in a way that it will actually work, like measure and signal and actually enforce something in a smart way, this is where I see a lot of organizations still falling behind. More than that, even if you have a PAM or a vault, or you're storing your credentials in a safe place, what we're finding is that in practice, there's a lot of bypasses, or there are a lot of areas that are not truly covered or in control. It means that in development areas, right, R&D phases, in IT, breaking glass accounts, all of those are not protected. And these, by not protecting them or just placing a false sense of security with a control that will not work or easily bypassed, you're bringing opportunities for the attacker to largely move right for every single entry point to those areas. And the last point is just that I must reinforce what you said about coverage. A lot of people are mixing and confusing between coverage and control. Even if I can see something, it doesn't really say that I'll see it's going wrong, or I'll see a malicious activity targeting it, that I'll be able to respond in time. As you showed here, the breakout time is so fast and rapid and like a blink of an eye, so that I need to be able to operate in that speed as well.
Yeah, and that's the average breakout time. I remember oh man, I want to say it was maybe just like 2018, 2019, CrowdStrike had figured out the on-prem breakout time, and it was like 8 minutes back then. So this is the 29 minutes, I think, is there because of the complexity of the environments and trying to get a lay of the land, the discovery work that has to happen, and then figuring out a plan of how I can jump from A to B to C to D. But still 29 minutes is very short. And I love that you talked about bypasses, because that's the bigger issue. I'll take like the example of service accounts I've got here on my screen. And that in concept is a bypass, because if somebody knows what the password is to a service account, because it's statically entered in there, maybe even if we're rotating the passwords through PAM and it updates the service account and so on, but someone's able to know what the password is for some reason, they don't have to go through PAM. They can just log in, and that becomes a bypass. And so, is that likely? No. Is it probable? No. Is it plausible? Yes. That sort of thing. So I think we're violently in agreement here. Let's talk about just briefly, and I've got, I think, 2 more slides. I'm going to hand things over to you. Is hybrid identity sprawl, the modern day I call it the identity estate, if you will, what all of you have in place. It looks something like this. You have on-prem, you have Entra maybe, or you do. You have SaaS-based identity providers, you have cloud-native identity and access management, and then that's identity. That's only all that is just identity. That doesn't include then all of the platforms that are leveraging that identity and all of the entitlements therein and all the permissions that are granted therein and so on. And then on top of that, you have non-human identities that are outnumbering. I forget where I got this stat from. I remember this is from, I want to say it's early last year when I first saw it. And I don't remember where I got that from. But you can, if nothing else, since I can't classify where I got that from, they definitely outnumber human identities. There's a lot more NHIs that just exist today, and we'll talk about that as well. But just going back to the modern identity estate in the cloud here, quick stat back from the Unit 42 report was 99% of cloud identities have excessive permissions. So by definition, you have permission sprawl that you're not even aware of. And you've got all of these aspects of what make up your identity for your organization here. And then the attacker gets to gain advantage of this. The whole idea here is, are we hurting the attacker by making it difficult, by creating that friction I talked about earlier? Or are we just helping them by making it easy? And so you think about this way: more stores, more pivot paths. I put cheaper lateral movement, meaning it's easier for them. They don't have to do as much work because they can try, let's say, the same password for a user across 4 different stores. It worked on 3 of them. Okay, great. Now I have at least access to via 3 identity stores, and now I can see where I can go pivot from. That sort of thing, because we all know that users don't change their passwords. They use them everywhere. They shouldn't, but they do. They use the same password over and over again. And then you think about things like the use of syncing is going to bridge on-prem and cloud. We have other types of technologies here. You see the tokens and the service principals, OAuth. Those are actually some of those bypasses. Like OAuth's a great example. Just giving an application access. We all do it. If you have Outlook on your Android or iOS phone, you've created there's an OAuth access to your phone's application to your mailbox in Microsoft 365 as an example, or the same thing with Google. And that grants a bypass. Even if you change the password for the user, that has nothing to do with the OAuth, because that's a separate entitlement that's been established here. And then the last part, and that just helps the threat actors as well. And then the last one here is just the visibility. And it's funny that you mentioned that earlier, Roy. So just because you can see it doesn't mean that you have control over it. And all this complexity is creating fragmented visibility. So in some cases, to augment what you had said, the reality is the organizations aren't seeing everything. There is fragmented visibility. And so therefore, it's very difficult to determine risk, difficult to determine that there's a leading indicator of compromise, and therefore I need to do something about it. Thoughts, would you agree? I just want to hear your thought, your viewpoint on the slide.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. I'll just say that I'll demonstrate exactly how it works well for the attackers and what are the breaking points that we can put. But this is exactly what we're seeing.
Perfect. And we'll see some of this in practice in, I guess, just a minute here. Then the last topic that we have on here is just thinking about AI agents, and because this is something that's different. We've talked about agentic AI as an industry. I'm certain that you all have attended a couple of webinars. We hear AI over and over again, usually as part of a marketing pitch for how awesome someone's solution is. But the reality is AI agents is actually a new type, because they are trying to act autonomously. Google came out with the A2A. I think it's established as a protocol. I think they call it a protocol, but it's a standard, and that's agentic AI to agentic AI. So that they were starting to come up with standards of how AI agents will communicate with other AI agents. And we will see more and more of this acting autonomously and intelligently to do things like, let's say, data transfers, or to make requests of something in your supply chain, or whatever the case is. And they are eventually going to have to access some data within organizations that they are tied to, even though they're talking to each other. and in order to do that, they're going to have to authenticate, have access, and so on. And so they have to be treated in the same way that humans and machine identities do as well. And the challenge here is that there's a governance gap that exists around AI identity. I talked about this a little early on. A couple of data points here. These come from the Cloud Security Alliance, their State of Non-Human Identity and AI Security report that came out January of this year. First stat here is less than a quarter of orgs have a formal policy for AI identity. So just, do we create one? Do we not create one? Do we have to go through a process where people need to be notified? How do we have to let the cybersecurity teams know? What are we doing here? And instead, it's just we're creating them, or whatever the case is, if your organization needs it. And the other one here is basically how low, the lowest percentage of orgs can actually figure out they can prevent an attack via a non-human identity, which includes, in this case, then an agentic AI agent here. And so there's a governance gap here. No idea they're even being created, for the sake of conversation on the left, and not very confident, nor should you be, that you can prevent an attack leveraging it here. And the idea here, going back to the idea of visibility and then adding on governance and adding on enforcement, is AI agents have to be thought of in the same way as other identity. Roy, without stealing any thunder from your presentation, what are you seeing as far as AI agents from an attack perspective? Are you seeing them more and more? It's increasing. Are you just seeing the authentication and the use of AI agent authentication increasing? What are you seeing as far as practical use of these, whether it's in a threatening or even non-threatening manner?
So first, since Silverfort, the company that I work for, like the product is actually reviewing all the authentications of everything in the network, in Active Directory, in cloud and SaaS and others. So we're seeing a lot of new forms of authentications of AI agents, or of autonomous, let's call it like that, like types of codes that are running through the networks themselves. We're seeing everything everything is in infancy level. So for example, you see a lot of code running uncontrolled, or like AI agents running in an uncontrolled way. A lot of copy paste of open source, or just like basic drag and drops building of agents. So all the trust relationships, the credentials, a lot of other stuff are not truly protected over those areas. Most of the agents are vulnerable, and they're there to stay. And in some cases, a lot of people do not really understand what they're actually operating. What we also see is a glitch in identity, because you can see that employees of organizations running agents based on their, let's say, browser accounts or SaaS accounts, and usually it's in the same computer or like the same browser that they're using for their corporate work. So you can see the glitches or like the multiple types of access that AI agents has. But the one thing to understand is that we see a lot of shadow AI in organizations. A lot of work that employees are doing with AI agents. Some of them are not formalized and corporately, attestated, and it's just like bigger than any other process in the organizations that they have right now. Bigger than security, bigger than regulations, bigger than everything. The rush for the AI.
That is a problem. Yeah, Banyan, one of our audience members, funny. It's what is it? Ironic. He says, "Lol, I used AI to help craft the AI policy, and then used AI to make the slides, and then finally voice it." He used 11 labs, and that's actually pretty funny just to do all that. But hey, that's good use. Honestly, it's not a bad choice, but it'd be funny if it was smart enough to go. Except for if you use, what did you say? Use ChatGPT. Except for ChatGPT, go ahead and use that all you want. Because it was self-aware or something. That'd be pretty funny here. And then Banyan also has mentioned, Banyan's saying it's absolutely vital and imperative to double check the results produced by AI and sanitize any data you give it.
So
and
true.
100%. Go ahead, Roy.
Yeah, we always forget. Some of us are using AI to generate a lot of stuff, but we forget to read it, right? We're partially reading that. Then they're posting, then we're regretting. Now, when it comes to other informed corporate decisions, it's exactly the same. So we need to remember, like as we have, we need to have a human in the loop in many, many cases.
You always have a human in the loop. There always has to be some, within the exception of things that are going to happen predictably every time. But that's not the case here. So last thing here that I have is just what should security teams be thinking about as far as measuring here. And the first thing is just thinking about the exposure portion of this, and that is the identity count that you have, but thinking about it from every aspect. And I don't know that as I was writing this and I was thinking about how I'm going to present this, I'm not sure the count is the issue, although I think it's more like you should have a grasp on what you have. You should know what you know. And so the count is an easy way to go. I know every single account that exists, whether it's AI, non-human, or human, I have it. We're good. But it's also, I think, more about the principle behind it, which is having a visibility into everything here. Then you're thinking about the identities that have standing privileges. As we get closer and closer to things like zero trust, you should be thinking about implementing something that's more just in time and having solutions in place where the user accounts themselves, even with, let's say, something like PAM, where you have what's quote unquote a privileged account, it's not. It's a designated account that will be granted privileges just in time when you log in with it and use it, and then once you log out, they're taken away. That way there's no standing privilege, and that reduces those bypasses that Roy was talking about here. And then you think about things like stale accounts, unused permissions. As an example, maybe it's greater than 60 days, maybe it's 3 months, maybe it's half a year, it's whatever you want, but you're thinking about some kind of time frame around when is an account stale and what permissions are no longer necessary or unused, because we don't want to keep that standing privilege in place here. So that's something that you should be measuring. On the movement risk with lateral movement, thinking about the paths that exist from a compromised identity. This is a tough one. This is meant more in concept because the answer to this question is sort of somewhat infinite, or it'd be some massive number. In essence, I'm asking, okay, if you have an account for Bob and Bob is privileged, how many paths exist for Bob? Now, none of us, who wants to do that? Raise your hand. I mean, no one, right? But the idea is understanding where can Bob access? Well, Bob can get to server 5, and if Bob gets to server 5, then he can get to server 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. I'm kind of making this up as I go along, but you get the point is where I'm going. And more than anything, you're not going to quantify this, and nor would you like write a report on this, but it's having visibility into and knowing that you can show this would be helpful. That would help you understand your risk. And that would also help you understand what identities really have to be secured more than others because of the risk that they pose to the organization here. Then are there any unmonitored protocols that exist? What's your mean time to detection? So you're thinking about any kind of identity-based anomaly here, and that has to do with solutions you may or may not have in place today. And then are there any coverage gaps? We're thinking about the ability to have enforcement on identity stores, whether that's removing permissions, disabling an account, anything that sort of ties the detection back to the fact that you can also have enforcement of whether it's response, or we're thinking about proactively maybe enforcement of policy across the board. Roy, this is obviously a non-exhaustive list. Is there anything you'd add? Is there anything you think is more important than something else that you think we should cover here, the audience needs to focus on?
I mean, the types of identities and protocol are enormous, right? So maybe just to double down on the movement risk between humans, machines, and AIs. Those areas are going to have very thin stitches in between them, but in order to operate, they need a very strong trust relations that we're configuring automatically without understanding. And this is where we have both coverage gap and controls. So for the listeners or like the participants, like when you're mapping out what you have there, number one question is that how this agent, how this NHI, how this unit is connected to the rest of the areas.
Perfect. I appreciate that very much. So I'm going to hand the reins over to you, Roy. Roy's going to cover a couple things here. You can see looking at things like how attackers are actually moving laterally, look at a real-world example of an intrusion here using scattered spider, and then talk about threat protection and incident response and thinking about that as a playbook here. So with that, Roy, I'm going to go ahead and make you presenter, and I'll let you know when I can see your screen. And for those of you that are watching and listening in, if you want to ask questions, feel free to ask questions, and I'll be happy to interject those. Roy, if it's okay, I might stick in a question every once in a while. By the way, I'm seeing your PowerPoint in case you're showing the presentation. I don't see that. I see the PowerPoint slide deck. I'm not sure if you want to show a different screen or not.
Okay. Full screen. Okay, let me just, can you show it?
That's it. There you go. Now you're good. And so I may interject and interrupt you. So maybe in between, I'll call them subtopics. Take a pause, take a breather for a second. I'll try to interject, and I'll try to make sure we get all the questions in that we can. But Roy, the floor is yours.
Yeah, fantastic. So yeah, just making sure that you saw me switching slides.
Yes, you're good to go.
So we'll speak today about why hackers really love identity and how that helps them. We'll speak about the adversaries using identities exactly, as Nick said, like through some real world like case studies and real life stories. And then we'll actually show you how you can stop this. I'll try to fold in a few demonstrations from our product, from attacks, and feel free to ask questions, and Nick, please, like, use me as much as possible so that I'll be able to interrupt me as much as possible so that we'll be able to address everything. So a little bit about myself. I live here in Boston with my wife and 2 kids. From whatever time I remember myself, I was a white-hat hacker breaking into systems, like breaking things. Never fix them, never build them, but tweaking them to do whatever I want. Yes, I've been electrocuted 3 times. I have a few scars of that as well. Then, like the government, I'm a former Israeli, so the Israeli government somehow, I don't know if somebody snitched on me or whatever, but they learned about my skills. So I've been recruited to work for the government. And since the age of 18 to 35, something like that, I found myself working on cyber security of critical infrastructure, of army weapons, of embassies, and like every asset that is important for the country, critical infrastructure, OT systems, things like that. Took a break, went through MIT, had the time of my life in MIT, learned that I want to be a founder and entrepreneur, founded a company, sold a company. This is how I found myself in Silverfort. And now in Silverfort, I'm running both the IR practice, the incident response practice, and the advisory practice for many, many companies. Silverfort is an identity security company, like 10 years old, something like that, with more than 12,000 customers, 100 customers. We're speaking about very large customers and medium-sized customers as well, and small customers as well. So like we're actually serving all across the size and the span of sizes of companies. And that's it. Without further ado, let's answer the first question: why hackers really, really like identity? And the main reason is that identities were not originally designed for security. Okay, so there's a lot of opportunities within identities for hackers to get into. So just to make sure that we're speaking on the same thing, identities are the glue and the connective tissues of the modern systems that we have, right? They're connecting our servers to users, our servers to other servers, our SaaS and cloud instances, and now AI, Gen AI, and AI agents all together by trust relations. So these are kind of like managed or automated trust lines, trust communication lines in between everything that we have in the organization. They're actually creating that convoluted underground map in between all the assets that we have. And we're considering vehicle identity as a vehicle that once you're authenticated to that vehicle, you're providing your credentials, your secrets, and you're being approved to ride that vehicle, then all the privileges, the trust relations, the access controls and conditions, the rules, everything is applied to you, and you can actually become a player of the game. You just like shielded yourself in, or like wear that shell of a digital identity, and you can work in the organization. Obviously, in many cases, identity is also an accountability tool, right? So that if somebody actually performed an action, we can go back and trace which user or which identity performed that action. And then there's like legal aspects to that. There's other aspect to those things. We can confirm things with our identity and do a lot of other stuff. We're bounded by legal rules, by identities, and other things. And by the end of the day, whoever able to assume, to authenticate, to steal, to piggyback, to impersonate, and there's tons of words that will describe that, the digital representation of yourself or of your organization, they can basically do whatever like the original identity holder should have done. That if we didn't protect the identity right. And we're going to speak about what's happening in the takeover attempts, in the privilege escalation attempts, and in the lateral movement attempts. So there's a lot of like blind spots. What you're seeing on the right in the way that identity was built. Yes, at the beginning we started to build, computers and like servers and networks. Then we started to learn how to govern them. Then directories showed up, so we had Active Directories. Or before that, we even had novel networks, if you remember that, with their own identity management practices. Then cloud came with multi-cloud vendors, so not just Microsoft now, but also Microsoft Cloud and AWS, and each one of them, Google, Oracle, they have their own identity practice. So you're actually trying to connect them together and build them together. Then SaaS applications came. Each SaaS application, so a Salesforce or GitHub, whatever, have their own authentication and identity management systems. So they all build on top of each other, together with each other, and it creates a lot of blind spots and a lot of thin stitches and lack of data that's shared between those platforms. Many of the legacy systems that we have do not support multi-factor authentication or any sorts of complex, let's say, beyond password complexity control. That means that by the end of the day, hackers or attackers that are trying to take over identities do not face any complexity at all. And there's a lot of legacy software and others that just like does not have any protection. Maybe the basic one, like taking over like RDP or SMB. If you guys still remember those protocols and still using them, they're not truly protected by nature. Machine identities are exploiting our world. So now it's not just that we have unprotected identities in some areas, we have a bunch of them. We have millions of them, like 1 to 40 is the ratio of human and machines. And again, there's a lot of things to protect on, and it's kind of like overwhelming. And by the end of the day, we're seeing a lot of faulty sense of security. When you do buy the product, you do have the firewall, you do have the vault, the PAM solutions, you do have the endpoint, but you did security, but you didn't really utilize them very well in order to truly protect the identities. And therefore, it brings us into a point that identity is actually the inventory or the warehouse of identity is pretty messy and cluttered and unorganized, like a dorm room. And it means that there's a lot of dormant services out there that are not being used, but they're still there. So there are like an opportunity for the attacker. There's long-lived secrets that we didn't really rotate. There's misused accounts. We're not really have system of records for the non-human identities, so they're out there and somebody can use them and we don't know what they are. Even if something is well secured, it's overprivileged, so there's an unnecessary attack surface, okay, that the attacker can actually use. So even if he got into a weak identity, if this identity is overprivileged, we're done. And many, many more things. And this is why hackers really love identity. This is why more than 80% of the attacks and breaches involve identities. This is why the breakout time is so short. So how do they use identities? So the anatomy of like a modern attack looks something like that. You're getting one identity, right? You're getting an account takeover of one simple identity. It can be a guest identity, a partner identity. It can be the least important or let's say privileged employee in the organizations, or the most sideline endpoint or access kiosk system or whatever that you have there, but you get there. You can buy those identities in the black market for $5. You can guess, again, the credentials themselves, the passwords, if they're weak. You can assume that an employee will use their personal passwords in the same way, or like have the same password for personal usage and corporate usage. There's a bunch of them, and phishing and other means that will help you to do that. But then you're landing inside an organization and you need to grow, and this is where you start to escalate your privileges or laterally move, or both. So you try to steal more credentials and more privileges of a specific identity that you're landing on, or of other identities, and we'll show how do you do that. And then you're hopping over to other identities. You understand how the organization and the hierarchy of identities are built, and trying to figure out who has access to what, who's actually accessing what, who is the boss, who is the manager, who's the admin, who are the ones that have to have access to specific resources that may be sensitive, like backup services and others. And then you working yourself, sorry, not you, the hacker working himself in order to become a privileged identity by either trying to escalate the privileges of the identity that he actually took over, or to hop out to another identity. Then obviously you're creating another identity, or you're trying to establish persistency or durability of your foothold, and then you're moving using the legitimate access that you just got. You're logging into other accounts and other assets in order to execute on your objectives, okay, to exfiltrate data, to encrypt, to run ransomware attacks and others. So by the end of the day, that flow that you're seeing right now on the screen is the anatomy of a modern attack. This is how it looks like. And now AI agents are doing a lot of the work for the attackers. Before that, there were like automations and scripts that they were running in some frameworks. So we could sign them, we can understand them, they had a specific behavior. Now they're changing all the time because an agent is not deterministic, and we'll speak about that. And with that anatomy, I want to jump over and describe one of the most famous and notoriously famous attack group. Has a lot of names, but the leading name is Caterpillar. And this threat actor is believed to be a group of people in the United States and in the UK. Most of them are not really known, but as opposed to many attack groups like APT29, Cozy Bears, and others, these guys are Western hackers, okay, guys or girls. And their main motivation is financial. And they're getting this either by just ransom you to encrypt your entire network or take over your network, encrypt it, stealing the data that is there that can cause a lot of reputational damage, or more than that, regulatory damage and others, and then extort you for the key to open the encryption key to open that encryption, or for not publishing the data that they already have. And they're releasing samples of data out there. They have a lot of successful attacks, and they are focusing mainly on compromised identities or getting access to identities and laterally move across identities. One of their famous actions in the recent years is SIM swapping, as we all, or a lot of people, are using their phones or text messages as like a means of secondary authentication. So that if I'm calling a data center, or like I'm calling my IT help desk and asking to change my password, they will generate a code and they will tell me like, okay, please read it out from your phone. I'm not speaking about the app itself. I'm speaking about text messages, and they're just replicating SIMs, swapping them, and then authenticate as the users themselves. So they have a lot of names. They are well known for hacking into Microsoft, into Okta. They have recent attacks on MGM Resorts, when they just like took over the entire casino in Vegas and made everything go off operations. People could not really get into their rooms or gamble. All the gambling machines had like the blue screens of death. And the common ground for everything was that the attack that I'm going to show you right away. And this is not just like one attack group. There's a lot of them that are actually focusing on identity, obsessed with identities, bidding on black market identities in organizations, and vice versa. So how do they work? We'll go through all the stages of what they're doing, and then we'll try to figure out how we can stop them, or what organizations could do in order to stop them. First, they're conducting a few steps that we're calling the human theater, basically social engineering. They will use the web, LinkedIn, social networks, everything in order to understand the beginning of the identity hierarchy on the organization. Who are the people that managing identities and security on organizations? Who are the admins? Who are the executives that may have very strong privileges? and then they will target them. The way that they usually do that is that they'll be either social engineering you, okay, once they'll find it, or that they will provoke a call to a call center and impersonate yourself. So they know that they don't have the password, they don't have the phone or the application in the phone that allows them to run the multi-factor authentication or to bring back the factor for validation. So if they cannot really overcome the technological hurdles, they'll try to overcome the human ones. So they're calling in the help center and they're faking a request for reset the password. Hey, I forgot my password. Hey, my password doesn't work. And more than that, they will say, listen, I just replaced my phone. I need you to help me to enroll my new phone number or even device chip number into your system so that I'll be able to install the MFA app. And usually they're just like either SIM swapping to being shown as they're using the same number, or they just like provide other personal details about the personas that they're impersonating. Then of course that the poor help desk operator that needs to answer hundreds of calls per day will just want to close that ticket. So they're making all the changes, they're granting access, they're seeing that phone call, the phishing, the voice phishing or video phishing as sufficient for confirming identities. And then this hacker just like got one of the most important identities in the organization, right? The IAM manager or the IT or the security people's identity. Then this identity is the hinge, okay? Once they're taking over a specific account, they will try to escalate the privilege that they have to start to lateral move. So what's the best way to do that? To take over other accounts and then to move across them and connect to different parts of the system and to own the entire system. There's a lot of like ideas of how to do that, but the ones that I really like to escalate privileges is to go to the keys room, all right, or the guard room, and then take all the keys. If everything is organized well, I'll be able to choose the keys to the safe or like to the luxurious protected assets and the rooms themselves. In this case, what the scatter spiders groups like to do most is to actually find an access to the vault or to the password wallets of organizations. Okay, so they'll try to get access to the password ones or to the CyberArk vaults or to the Delinea vaults or others, right? And these protection mechanisms are usually based on one assumption, that the vault will be protected and that's it. So if somebody got their hands on the credentials, they'll be able to do whatever they want. Nobody will validate their identity again. There will not be any checkpoint by other tool because we already have the safe, right? And the safe is the most protected area. So once these credentials or tokens and secrets are being stolen, you have access to everything, to admin accounts, to service accounts, to APIs, to federated credentials that will allow you to jump from on-prem to cloud. In many other cases, like in MGM, the hackers, in this case, stole an identity of an Okta manager or like an Okta operator with admin privileges, and then they just used this identity. They didn't hack, they logged into a server that's syncing between Okta and on-prem Active Directory. They then sniffed all the passwords through allegedly through the wire. They stole passwords to on-prem, and then they jumped over through those credentials and passwords to the on-prem environment. And that thing is exactly what kind of like makes identity, again, the hinge, the areas that will allow the attacker to actually swiftly run across all of these organization systems. Then you have the keys, you can actually compromise the single sign-on. So you got authenticated as one user, and we'll show this in the examples. You can actually use all the credentials and all the trust relations that this user have with many systems. So you owned all the SaaS access, application access, everything. And then obviously, you're starting to move across systems. You're trying to understand what you have. Okay, I have access to Salesforce. What data is there? Oh, I have access to GitHub. I have the code repositories of the organizations themselves. Maybe in the code repositories, I can find some keys and secrets, or maybe I can actually poison them and install other things. Then they actually decide what they want to do. If they want to move on to data, like to stealing data, source code, IP, to steal financial data and then enjoy operating it for their financial benefits, or to, again, extort and run these operations in which the organization will need to pay them. And you know, I've been called to a lot of organizations, and I was surprised to see that many of them are paying their ransomware. And it's not that the hackers will help them and will unlock their systems, but they're paying, and we're speaking about millions. It's a very, very, very beneficial business to be at. And they started working, and those groups are very, very famous, and it's really hard, you know, like for FBI and other organizations just to catch them. They ran operations on healthcare organizations, they ran operations on casinos and financial centers and other places, and they're on the kind of like online operations all the time. So you can see here clearly how you can progress from social engineering and human theater to getting a grip on a specific identity, regardless if it's strong or not strong, and then laterally move and play across that. Nick, do we have any questions so far before we're moving to the next phase of like telling how exactly lateral movement is being done and how can we protect against it?
No questions, but one of our audience members, Banyan, has been commenting all along, talking about Scattered Spider with AI and all the spelling issues, talking about ways he's trying to be helpful, ways to find lost laptops or phones and so on. So no questions, you're good to go, keep going. But Banyan, we're definitely seeing them. I'm just not interjecting them yet because I'm trying to let Roy continue on. But again, anyone else in the audience as well as Banyan, if you have questions, stick those in. We'll try to interject those right away.
Okay, now you made me curious about the typos. Cool. So let's deep dive a little bit about how attackers actually escalate identity privileges and then how they're laterally moved. So again, what's the privilege escalation? Okay, so we said that the attackers are actually getting a grip of a very weak identity. Okay, so they compromise the identity itself, but then even the identity itself can be protected inside, right? So it has these privileges, or that you need to use another way in order to get access to more privileged assets with this identity. So there's 4 ways that you can do that. A, you can steal another privileged identity. So for example, you're hacking into you're logged into a server, okay, and then you're running a credential dump from the memory, okay. So you're actually taking all these encrypted credentials that are in the memory that will help the system works well, and then you're decrypting them on like aside, and then you're coming back and you're using them in order to log into others. Password sprays and brute force in other ways. But usually the attackers are really sophisticated and will use shelf tools and commoditized tools in order to dump and steal other credentials. Nobody speaks today about keyloggers and other things that we spoke in the past, because there's much more elegant ways to do that. The second thing is to impersonate privileged identities, right? So we can, in one way, we can steal the credentials, but in the other ones, we can just like steal the sessions or steal or interject ourselves right after the authentication phase, or any impersonification of tokens or other things that will allow us to do that. And we'll show that. We can modify identity permissions, and sometimes you'll be surprised. There's a lot of shadow admins, and you can actually add yourself some permissions that will allow you to do much more. You can add yourself to groups that have better permissions and a lot of other tactics. And then you can actually create a privileged identity, right? You can create admins, or you create designated identities that will allow you to do small parts in your way to dominate the networks themselves. there's a lot of demonstrations of those tactics in many attacks. From the very basic one of Capital One that everybody are using, where a specific key to the kingdom was stolen, and then a token was replicated in order to get access to an entire financial, like very big financial company cloud instance. We saw attackers forging authentication tokens that allowed them to actually access government emails of O365 of Microsoft. And we saw that inside the famous SolarWinds attacks, APT 29, the Russians themselves actually escalated privileges with impersonification, during the SolarWinds attack itself. And I want to show you a little bit how it looks like, and forgive me if it will be, through our product. And feel free, of course, to ask questions. So, just a second, I need to mute the voice somehow here. Okay, so what you're seeing right now is how do we actually, like, there's an attacker that actually hacked the network, and you can see the command line screen over here, and they got a foothold with a very low privileged identity. But they're part of the network. They're part of the, they can communicate with a domain controller or like with the Active Directory themselves. So they're starting to forge access requests and ticket requests to specific servers, okay? And the way that they're doing that is that they're impersonating as a specific server that they sniffed in the network or a specific user that they already saw in the network themselves, and then setting a request for getting an access token to that specific service, right? And what you're seeing here is actually a request for the tickets, the TGT, and then you can see the response that the server, or it really depends on the protocol, will actually send back to that user. Now, it's encrypted, right? But it's encrypted in a very basic encryption way that we can actually either break within a couple of hours, or because it's always encrypted, the password's in the same way, right? So you can actually create a table of many of those passwords ahead of time, and then just like compare what you have here to what you have in the table. And for those who are actually into the weeds in these attacks, sorry for oversimplifying that. I can speak about cracking passwords and credentials for hours, but I just want to pass through this super quickly. So you can see that the attacker have a weak identity. They actually just like forge a request, disguised as another very strong identity. And then what you can see here, and this is kind of like our authentication firewall, you can see these requests coming in, okay? And you can see that these requests were allowed. You can see something else that we kind of like recognized, that the encryption of the authentication or like of this ticket is very, very weak, okay? And usually we should stop these types of encryptions. Many organizations are not doing that, not because they don't know how to do, maybe they're not aware that they have things that are communicating with these kind of encryptions, but more than that, because they have legacy tools that needs to be changed in order to stop that. The good news are that Microsoft are fabricating most of the, becoming obsolete of most of those encryption things, so we'll not have a choice, we'll need to fix them. So attackers are trying to downgrade the encryption level. They will steal the key, they will encrypt the key, and then they will reuse it in order to escalate the identity's privileges, or just log in like as in this case to other identity, and then laterally move and cross the network themselves. I'll show you later how you can fix those things and how you can stop them easily without breaking anything, and even if you have like legacy environments. But this was one of the examples of how things are getting done here. Lateral movement is really similar to what we saw in privilege escalation, but there's like fairly different tactics that I want to speak about, okay? Credentials reuse across the system. So, I mean, it speaks for itself, right? I'm stealing a very weak password of the attacker, from a specific identity of a specific identity, and then I'm reusing that password, or I'm dumping all the other password, or getting access to the safe and taking all the keys and using them. I can reuse cloud or session tokens if I snip them or I stole them. I can actually find human identities that are connected in some way. We'll see that with non-human identities, and these non-human identities like service accounts and others are very strong, and attackers are delegating or like laterally move from these human identities to non-human identities. I can use remote access tools. I think spoke about cloud identity pivoting, like running in across identities, and even trying to trick AI agents that the user is using in order to execute commands or execute access types that the user should not have be able to do, but the agent can do, and we can just like trick the agent and tell them that we're a different identity, and we'll actually be able to play with that. And here are the ways that we can stop that. And I'll go back in a second to the mini demo, and I'll show you this. The important thing is, and we'll speak about this a lot, is to enforce runtime identity protection. So not just to configure the identity properly to begin with and then set and forget it, is that continuously monitor and automatically respond or enforce when there's a suspicious activity. Okay, and then using our controls that we've mentioned at the beginning, or reusing them in order to make sure that we're speaking with the right identity or the right person. So if a help desk need to actually verify your identity, instead of sending you a text message or looking at you in a Zoom screen, they can send requests of verification to other devices that you have. The ones of you actually having Apple or Google that using those authentications ways, like through different, like, prove me that you're owning the other devices. These are very, very strong ones. And Silverfort have a lot of them, like in our apps, that will allow you to do those. Remove opportunities for the attackers are the ones that, these are the low-hanging fruits. Usually there's a lot of strong identities that are not even operating. They're inactive. Let's disable them. We have admins that are authenticating weekly. Let's add MFA to them, and let's make sure to enhance their reset password protocols and other things. There are a lot of users with privileges that they don't need. So why should we let the attackers enjoy those privileges if it's just like unnecessary to have them? Let's remove them. This cleanup work takes time and energy, but you can make them automated and just remove opportunities for the attackers themselves. If you have high target values, ring fence them. Make sure that not everyone can access them, even if they're verified. Based on the identity, you can actually lock the origin, you can lock the destinations, you can actually use identity as a firewall to those things. Obviously, detections of escalations, number 4 over here. So you can actually see the behavior. You can see when one accesses a specific identity and then the same one is trying to move to another identity, and then they're trying to use SSO in order to move to other assets, and then doing this in a way that is not really regularly operational, right? They're able to jump quickly and swifting through 5-6 apps and map what they have there. It's not human, it's a script. It's an attacking script. Let's play with that. And then secure the credentials and tokens. I mean, I can speak about this a lot of time. Maybe the one thing that you should remember is that just don't trust just the vaulting process, because the vaulting is sometimes it's the weakest link. I know that some of you need a vault because of regulations and other standards that they need to meet at, but in most of the cases they are bypassed. So make sure that you have vault with something else, with MFA, with just-in-time access, with a human in the loop that will verify those access when they need, or at least will be called to verify if there's an unusual thing that they need to do that we didn't see them doing before.
Ray, we got a question to come in, if we can. Gregory wants to know, how reasonable is the monitoring of abnormal locations? We have users using VPN and tons of false positives.
That's correct. The Impossible Traveler and the and all the location-based incrimination techniques or whatever, they're hard to do. But I think that it's reasonable if in worst case scenario, we'll just like, interrupt the user for a second and throw them, again, an MFA or another ask for authentication, right? The problem with these kind of detections were that, what are we going to do when we're finding this? We'll just block the access. If we'll block the access, we'll disrupt the business. And let's say that we have 5 of them a day, 6 of them a day, I don't know, like even less than them. We can re-authenticate. We can do things that will not really disrupt the business. So even if the detection is not pure, even if there's a lot of false positives, you can actually bring more data and operate some controls in order to make sure that this identity is right. And I can tell you that I have customers that are really okay with that. Yes, we will bother the user twice a day with MFA, or we will like run a just-in-time access if we're not sure that this user is the same user. And when it comes to very privileged actions, we'll run through another utilizing of the control. And there are people that will say, no, we don't want to disrupt the users anymore. But guess what? When it comes to admins, when it comes to privileged access, they usually do.
There's another question that came in. Banyan is asking, and I'm going to rephrase his question a little bit, but he mentions a honeypot account with auditing is beyond this presentation. That's his question. I didn't ask it as such. My tone was wrong. But where does a honeypot come in? Is it even necessary with what we're talking about? What are your thoughts there?
Honeypot is hard to utilize, but I really like them. As a matter of fact, I won a few national prizes for catching attacks with honeypots back in the days. So I will never say no to honeypot. I think that it just should be like smartly applied and utilized. So for example, you can make an account that will look like an admin account. You can make it a little bit vulnerable, and you can assume that the first path of lateral movement will across this account. And then you can actually take the rigid or the static attributes of the attackers, like IP addresses or like others, and be alerted that these will be repeated, or that there's actually an attack, and then not move to DEFCON, but move the other authentication systems to the next level because you know that you're targeted. This is one type of honeypot. Now, a lot of our customers are using honeypots, right? They're creating those, and they're creating alert on any authentication or any attempt to access those accounts. Obviously, these accounts are just look like admins or like very strong identities. They're not. They have zero capabilities to do something, and we're collecting data about the attackers with them. So that's great, but you need to utilize that. You need to make sure that you're utilizing this in line or in runtime, so that the signal that you're getting will be able to be utilized with the other controls that you have. Another question?
Nope, that's it. Perfect. Thank you. Please continue.
Okay. Love those questions. So when it comes to lateral movement, of course, the federated trust or the thin stitches between Okta and the applications, between Entra ID and your Active Directory, all of those always feels to me like somebody enforced these vendors to create those connections, and they say like, you can trust me, that's fine, but I will not verify what's coming from your side, and vice versa. Hardness is so. Okay, so for example, make sure that when there is a transition of trust or a federation of trust, MFA is there. The tokens will be restricted. The session will be time limited in a way that nobody will be able to piggyback on those. Bring some more context before you're actually allowing this federation to happen. For example, correlate identity risks and signals across the platforms. In the first slide about Salesforce, I showed that we have integrations with everyone, even with our competitors, like across the globe. We're all sharing signals so that by the end of the day, when you're making an access decision, again, not for everyone, just to the privileged ones, you'll be able to assess risk and to say, okay, did any of the other platforms that I'm trusting right now saw something differently that should make me aware when I'm getting like, when I'm figuring out if to grant access or not? And if they did, and if the request of access is privileged, and if the privilege to utilize our insensitive data, then you can re-authenticate or have harder authentication of the users themselves or the machines themselves. I mean, there's a lot of ways. I'll leave you with the slides here, and there's like, again, like I'll show you my LinkedIn profile barcode, and feel free to reach out with questions regardless of the company. I mean, it's a team game, it's a team play that we're having here. And for the last slide, or two last slides, I want to leave you with two things that are important. A, since identity is the core of a lot of attacks, please review those like steps that we're using all the time within our customer base in order to eradicate or stop attacks on time. Even if you're in the middle of a ransomware attack, you can save yourself. And I'll spare you the examples of organizations that called us and there was an encryption like started. We're not a services company. We're just like helping our customers or prospects, and this is how we sell the product. But we're working with the strongest IR companies in the world, like Mandiant and Booz Allen and others. And as they're using EDRs, as they're using like firewalls and others, as they're using other tools, they're using us in order to make sure that even a compromised identity, you'll be able to get back control of this identity and to filter out the access of the attacker. You'll not need to take out this identity from the network. So the things that I recommend you to think about is A, moving from admin time, which is configuration time, to runtime or real time. I think that you saw in that short demo, the authentication firewall that I showed there, we're seeing every authentication in real time. It may be seconds or microseconds of kind of like delay, but we're seeing what's happening. Once you're moving there, you're not just like seeing, you can actually make decision in runtime, and you can change these decisions based on the alert mode that you are with smart policies or anything else. And it sounds complex, but it's super easy, right? You can just like make 6-7 types of policies that you will impose in different times. You'll be able to move the organization from detection only mode to automated preventions, or God forbid, to respond if something is happening. Okay, and we can speak ages about the difference between prevention and response. So I hope that at least for you guys, it's clear. Contain the attacker. So again, we know which identities are going to be the most important ones for the attackers. On these, we can impose policies that will restrict a lot of types of accesses to these identities, or at least will bring more types of controls like just in time, like MFA, like other types of identity verification, or will cut all the redundant access that we know that this identity is not really utilized, just to make sure that the attacker will not be able to enjoy that depth of access. Protect privileged identities. Okay, like I'll jump over, you have this on the screen. I think that the last thing that is really important for everyone to know is that you can identify and mitigate posture weaknesses or misconfigurations ahead of time. But if you didn't do it and there's an attack right now, at least take those privileged identities that you have, list down all the way that that can be that attackers can actually use and enjoy, and then make sure that you're reducing or removing those opportunities for the attackers to go. If we have questions, I can actually definitely answer them, or that I'll move to the last slide that tells you a little bit about, last slide that tells you a little bit about how AI changed the picture, what's similar and what's different. Nick, what's your suggestion here? I know that we have 5 more minutes.
I don't have any more questions that have come in, so feel free to cover that last slide if you'd like to.
Perfect, thanks. So this is for like another session that we may run in the future about how to protect AI agents. So if you all know, AI agents have their own reasoning system, so there's no fixed code flows or scripts that will run them. The reasoning of an AI engine will actually decide how to interpret and ask that a human or non-human just like gave them, and then they will craft a plan of how to do that, and then they have their legs and their hands that they will actually connect to all the applications, to your browser, to your Salesforce, to your email inbox, and will do whatever you need to do. The main problem is that they're non-deterministic. So it's really hard to understand them in a way of if this happening, then that will happen, because you don't really know what is going to happen, right? They haven't decided that yet. So making security decisions in advance or trying to guardrail them is something that is really hard. They have hard-coded logic, right? Sorry, they have like natural languages. So it's not even code that's running them. You're conversing with them. So if you got used to actually filter activities or filter some access requests, now we need to understand something else which is more conversational. Okay, we lived in a world that every app was isolated, but AI agents are actually connected everything together. They're like cross-siloed, and they need to do that. They need to have privileges for everything. So the agent itself is super privileged, and authentication is replaced by identity chaining as well, right? Like where the agent is authenticating once, but then have access to numerous platforms and chain his power with others. And by the end of the day, they're super fast, right? It's a machine speed momentum. So pre-configuring security is pretty hard. And the main thing that I want to say here is that everything is coming in to be runtime and inline protection. And the world is leaning toward protecting two things. It's taking the identity of the initiator, of the operator, of the person who actually, or the machine that actually asked the agent to do something. So we're validating that. And from the other hand, we are trying to understand what is the intent of that request. So post the conversational part and the logic determination that the agent needed to do, the agent is trying to do something, and it has its reasoning. So if we're taking that reasoning and we're taking that request of action, and we're trying to understand the intent, what they're trying to do, and then we're firewalling both of them, the identity and the intent, then that's the way to actually protect AI agents. Yes, there's a lot of approaches down there in the market. I saw all of them in test right now. I believe that identity and intent firewalls are the ways to do that. And like if we'll communicate later, I'll be very happy to show you how we're doing that and how vendors are doing that. And with that, I want to say thank you for you to participate in our webinar and move it back the baton to Nick.
Wonderful. Appreciate you very much, Roy. Hey, everybody. It looks like we don't have any more questions coming in. If you happen to be typing in a question, feel free to continue to do so, and someone from Silverfort will reach out to you directly and make sure you get your question answered. And with that, we're going to go ahead and close things out and give you 2 minutes of your day back. Appreciate you all hanging out with us today for today's Real Training for Free session. We look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks a lot. And this ends today's session. We'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.